We are currently in a very difficult political position in India right now. So how do you manage to do this work, and how do Dalit liberation groups manage to keep struggling under the current political climate?
Yeah, like one thing is that, the more oppression you experience, the more humiliation you experience. I think, the only way you think that to fight, to overcome is to fight back. And like that's what, like, like in the last 5 6 years, particularly after the Hindu right came to power in India, one of the important thing is that, it is trying its level best to suppress and, also, you know, impose the version of Hindutva on every community. And in this, as in its aspirations, like particularly the Hindu right is trying to rewrite the textbooks, and also it is unleashed, lot of violence against Muslims, because Muslims don't fall into their narrative of what we call this Hindu India, and their Muslim is always seen as an outsider. The second community, which is at receiving end with the Hindu right, is the Dalits, because we don't, as Dalits, we know that, the very idea of accepting Brahmanical Hinduism is like accepting your oppression. So Dalit always becomes a very important problem figure in the idea of Hindu India, because we ask where we are, because we are not even considered as part of the Hinduism, but we are expected to consume this idea that we are Hindus. So that's why Dalit is always seen as a problem. And in this context, what you're seeing is that in last 4 5 years, it is Dalits and Muslims who are attacked on the roads in the name of beef, and also in the name of cow protection. And, majority, if the after Muslim, next the target is a Dalit. That's why, what you see, that the pattern of political developments in India, you see that, last 5 years or 6 years of situation after Modi came to power, is that, like there is a systematic, implementation of violence, state-sponsored violence, particularly the way the issues are picked up, the way issues are projected. Like 2016 onwards, you see that, Dalit Muslim, and in last year it was Kashmir.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, like the way, like it's systematic, like, that's why, like, it's so scary, precisely because it's a fascist state, precisely because of that. Things are not happening randomly, that, these crazy people are coming to roads and killing. No, it's not that. Like, state is complicit in this violence, because an upper caste man, if he rapes a Dalit woman or rapes a Muslim girl, he knows that, he will not be punished. That's why, in Kashmir, the, very young girl was raped by this, uh, old Hindu priest. No, the girl was like, not, age of his granddaughter.
Yeah.
Like the same thing, what happened a few months back in Hathras, 19-year-old Dalit girl, 4 upper caste men. Like what you see that, they know that this caste Hindus, the state is with them. So this systematic violence is happening. And second thing is that, state also, like in last 2 3 years, one of the important development is that, activists, rights activists, particularly Dalits, and also intellectuals and women, journalists, lawyers, Muslims, they were all getting arrested on these sedition charges, saying that they're all conspiring against the state. But these are all very valued intellectuals, lawyers, like, human rights lawyers, and Sudha Bharadwaj, who was fighting for indigenous communities, or, Dalit activists, like, people like N. Sai Baba, a 70%, physically challenged man, he basically uses wheelchair. He was arrested under the charges of sedition. Can you imagine a person who is, can't even walk, he's been arrested, on sedition charges. And, like, lot of them, like, people, very young people, like Umar Khalid, a university student who did PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, very young guy, and, who affirms his faith in constitution and also non-violent struggles. He was arrested. Now he's in jail. So what you see is that, this spurious charges state is creating and, trying to jail people and intimidate them. But, what you see is that, that doesn't mean that people are deterring. Like every day, young India is, speaking against it, and a lot of, courageous people. That's what, like, I feel, many times that, we live in a most privileged country in the world. We can sit here and talk, and, we can sleep without worry that, no one will knock our door.
Yeah.
But though they are the people who are fighting in that context. That's why I think, like across the world, one of the important thing in the last 2-3 years as Dalits, what we are doing is that, we are raising our voice, wherever we are, that, we are there with the people who are on the streets and fighting for, dignity and rights of the people.
As you know, my origins are Muslim Indian, so I'm really excited to learn more about the alliance between Dalit and Muslim struggles. Can you talk a little bit more about these kinds of alliances across differences, both in India and outside of India?
One of the important things, like last Hindu right, the rise of Hindu right and attacks on Muslims and Dalits, one of the important realization it made, particularly both Dalit and Muslim communities in India, is that, unless we are together, we cannot take on this fascist regime. And I think that's one of the reasons why, and not only even before coming up this thing, one of the important thing is that there is a natural, alliance between Dalits and Muslims, because, one of the important thing, like, even as a child, I remember the only people with whom we could freely interact were Muslims. This whole idea that Hinduizing Dalits is an agenda which started only after RSS started, using this as a political weapon. But if in villages, I remember, like that's what one of the things is that, the only communities to whom we could freely interact were Muslims. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like in Uttar Pradesh, for example, when Bahujan Samaj Party experimented this whole idea that Bahujan community, Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims as together as a community, and they were able to really, challenge the political power of the Hindutva. So I think political experiments were also made, but what in the last 5 years, what had happened that, because Hindutva has threw us into existential crisis. I think Dalit Muslims particularly have come forward, and they are on the same platform, particularly in Hyderabad and even in Uttar Pradesh. Like in fact, the Bhim Army, if you might be familiar or not, like Chandrasekhar Azad, who is organizing Dalits in India. And in fact, when this CAA, anti-CAA and NRC protests were happening, this Chandrasekhar Azad, Dalit leader, very young Dalit leader, was in Makkah Masjid, Jama Masjid in Delhi, and he was basically coming out of Masjid and trying to form this Dalit Muslim alliance. And in fact, last week, with this weekend, Saturday, when we organized this webinar and vigil for Hathras victim, one of the important person who was speaking on our platform was Muhammad Pracha, who was basically Supreme Court, Supreme Court lawyer, and also who is basically fighting for the Dalit victims. So we have this, one thing is that, this Hindu fascism really made us come together to, Italy as a battle of survival. So coming forward into the context of India, coming out of India, one of the important thing is that, we also realize being here that, because Hindutva is very well organized network, especially across North America. In fact, a lot of work.
Tell us what is Hindutva? Because most of the people don't know what is. Can you just explain what is Hindutva?
Basically, Hindutva is like a political ideology. It's a political philosophy developed by this Golwalkar. He is a Hindu right thinker who was part of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Basically, this whole idea of imagination of Hindu India. And one of the important thing is that, he talks about Karma Bhumi, Dharma Bhumi. Like basically, for him, the religions which are not born on the Indian soil were foreigners. If you practice any religion which is not part of Indian soil, like other than Buddhism, Hinduism, like, if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you're an outsider. So his imagination is that, this whole idea that, politicization, like using religious identity and also religious imagination as a political idea, starts with this MS Goldwalker's idea of bunch of thoughts. He wrote about that in his text. And they believe that, anyone who doesn't abide, accept Hinduism and basically the religion which is not born, in the soil of India, were considered foreigners. And then, what happens is that if you don't accept their version of, um, Hindutva, so anyone who is opposed to them is considered an outsider. That's what one of the things the government of India tries to do. Like criticism of government, they think criticism of nation. They don't, what they try to do is they combine both. Like if you say anything against Modi, it means you're making statement against India. So what happened that, this particularly the upper caste, the early, people who migrated out of India and particularly to North America and Europe were all these Brahmins and other upper castes. And especially 1950s and 60s onwards, when they came to these countries. So one of the ways in which they try to, create their own communities is through temple networks. Across North America, you see that, even in Europe, constructing Hindu temples was a big symbol of this cultural, politics of, Indian diaspora, where, that's when, you whole idea that this Hindu godmen, particularly this Hare Krishna mission and all these things, part of this larger network of, creating this community of Hindus in North America. But you look at the social history of these people, they all come from Brahmin and upper caste backgrounds. And these are the people who marketed yoga as a very important cultural, PR network, public relations, campaign is that, yoga and vegetarianism. And afterwards, after 90s, it is Bollywood dance and, all these things. So there is a systematic effort basically, because one thing is that because these are all upper caste privileged people who migrated with higher education and they all came into good professions like, engineers, doctors, bankers and investment, because of their caste privilege, they are also able to, niche themselves as this model minority. Unlike any other immigrant communities, Indians look very successful, highly educated and sophisticated because, caste privilege aligns with their educational and, racial privilege. So that's why, the kind of politics they do in North America or in Britain are very different from any other minorities because they come from this caste privilege and also caste contempt. Contempt precisely because, they have contempt towards dark skin. They have contempt towards poor people. So it will not be a surprise an upper caste Hindu aligns with the Republican Party. Republican Hindus are there in US precisely because, it aligns very well with their, caste, class and also racial privilege. So these networks, when we see in India, particularly in North America, that these networks, like upper caste networks or temples and also various institutions, they are the one basically who provided legitimacy for Modi. Because of the 2002 Gujarat riots in which, thousands of Muslims were butchered, Modi was not allowed to enter into any country. He was denied visa to come to America, Canada, Britain, all these countries. But, who are the people who campaigned for his legitimacy? Were these non-resident Indians, mostly upper caste men who were basically, campaigning and making PR networks. And they are the one who are hosting Modi when he became prime minister in, Times Square in London, in the US and also in Toronto, wherever he went. These are the people, the irony is that they don't even have Indian citizenship. None of them hold Indian citizenship. All these people who talk about Modi and Hindutva sitting in North America, they are not even Indian citizens. And that's why, we realized, particularly, after Modi came to power, one of the important things is that how do we counter this, right-wing campaign, particularly in the name of cultural politics, in the name of this, religion, which is supposed to be non-violent and peace and loving, this false image myth they spread. How do we counter? So that's one of the reasons why, I started writing very actively, and also then I connected with this Canadian Council for Indian Muslims, an organization. I remember 2 years back, they invited me to deliver a lecture to their annual conference. So then, one thing is that, whether I had a community or not, I never, I always made it a point to speak against Hindu right. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to connect with, Indo-Canadian Muslim community. And now basically we are actively working together and, and doing, particularly in last 2 years, we are organizing a lot of activities and also lectures and trying to educate particularly non-Indians, particularly Canadians, about what actually is happening in India against Muslims and Dalits and also lower castes.
And also just about Kashmir, like now with the, it was, you talked when we were discussing before. So can you tell us that now with the Modi's invasion of Kashmir, like annexing with India, so can you tell about that? What is the implication, long-term implications for India internationally?
Yeah, that's one thing, like Kashmir, it's annexation of Kashmir was not a new thing, happened under Modi. Like, Kashmir was always one of the highly militarized zone in the world after Palestine, I think.
Yeah.
Throughout the history of post-independent India, even 80s and 90s. What had happened that, Kashmir is always under heavily militarized and, Kashmiris are always controlled with force. But the difference between what, Modi has done and the Modi regime's, what he did in 2019 August, how is it different from previous times is that, like in previous regimes, despite having heavy military presence and, killings of Kashmiris and all those things happening under the Indian armed forces, one of the important thing is that, we had this special constitutional provisional called 370, Article 370, which actually is like, had given this autonomous status to Jammu and Kashmir because of its special historical situation and also because that's the only Muslim majority region in India. So it enjoyed this, so-called constitutional privilege of being protected from the, outside incursions and also the cultural privileges of maintaining its autonomy. So what the Hindutva, like what had happened that, this campaign by the Hindu right against Kashmir, Article 370 is not new. It started somewhere in 1990s onward, the very foundation of BJP and Jan Sangh and all these Hindu right forces. One of the ways in which they try to, if you look at their manifestos, various election manifestos from 1990s onwards, abolition of 370 was part of their game, political game. But what had happened that, till Modi came to power, no one did. One thing is that, the Hindu right never got full majority on its own. Like 2 terms of Vajpayee, who was prime minister on behalf of BJP, though he was Hindu right, but that time also he formed government with the outside support of so-called secular parties.
Yeah.
So they never had parliamentary majority to abolish this special privilege for special constitutional provision of 370 for Kashmir.
Yeah.
But what Modi did is that, by abolishing this, one of the important thing is that, whatever the constitutional protections Kashmiris had in terms of, their, safeguarding their cultural, political rights, they have been stripped off. So now, in fact, what happens is that, in fact, by doing that, he's making the country is basically pushed Kashmiris into like life and death situation, like to exist as a Kashmiri now, as a citizen and also as a person, is that, you either you have to choose between subservient position as a citizen without any rights, like you become a subject citizen, not a citizen. And now what you see is that in this context, what you see, like this is, as I said in the beginning, it is part of the larger game of Hindutva, where basically erase any sort of autonomous identities, either it's Muslims, Dalits, or Christians. Like it's part of that. Like why is it that it, in realistic terms, it doesn't make much difference whether what he has done in terms of what actually Kashmiris are suffering through. But symbolically, what it does is that it strips them of any sort of rights or claims over the constitution.